In a potential game-changing move, President Donald Trump is contemplating significant alternation to the United States' role within NATO. Discussions among Trump and his advisors suggest a shift towards prioritizing NATO members based on their defense spending, potentially setting a new threshold at 5% of GDP. Trump's proposal to tie defense commitments to member countries' spending levels could fundamentally alter the collective defense principle enshrined in Article 5. This change could lead to a decline in trust among NATO members and potentially destabilize international alliances. Will Trump's push for increased defense spending define the future of NATO's collective defense, or will it split the unity that has held the alliance together for decades? Welcome to In Depth. In Latvia, Swedish soldiers have participated in the first NATO military exercise since joining the alliance, training alongside Canadian, Spanish and Italian forces. According to the Washington Post, this exercise demonstrates NATO's commitment to collective security against any potential aggression. However, concerns persist about the US support for NATO, as President Trump has questioned the alliance's mutual defense pact under Article 5. Despite these doubts, NATO's eastern flank remains bolstered with multinational brigades, including the 3,500-strong force in Latvia, to deter any threats. President Trump has long been critical of NATO, viewing it as overly dependent on US support. The New York Times stated that in Trump's second term, he has emphasized that Europe's security is no longer a top US priority, focusing instead on domestic and Indo-Pacific issues. Trump recently suggested that the US might not defend NATO's member. We don't meet defense spending targets, calling it common sense. For Europe to replace US contributions to NATO, it would need significant investments in money, time and cooperation. This includes increasing defense spending and bolstering military capabilities. However, such a transition would be challenging and require sustained US support to avoid security gaps that could be exploited by adversaries.
The very fabric of NATO. President Donald Trump is contemplating a significant shift in US policy towards the alliance. At the heart of this potential change is a proposal to prioritize NATO members who meet a specific defense spending threshold, potentially as high as 5% of their GDP. This marks a departure from the long-standing principle of collective defense enshrined in Article 5, which states that an attack on one member is an attack on all. Trump's discussions with his advisors have centered on adjusting US involvement to favor countries that allocate a substantial portion of their GDP to defense. This could mean that the US might not defend a NATO ally under attack if that country fails to meet the required spending level. Additionally, the US may prioritize military exercises with compliant members, further emphasizing the importance of defense spending. This potential policy shift is not new. Trump has long criticized NATO countries for not meeting the established goal of spending 2% of their GDP on defense, despite a National Security Council official affirming Trump's commitment to NATO and Article 5. The president's comments have cast doubt on the alliance's solidarity. The implications of such a change would be profound. It could undermine the trust and unity that NATO has built over decades, potentially weakening the alliance's ability to respond to threats collectively. As Trump continues to press for increased defense spending, the future of NATO's collective defense principle hangs in the balance.
As Trump considers linking U.S. defense commitments to NATO members spending, the alliance unity hangs in the balance. Will fiscal responsibility fortify or fracture NATO's collective defense? For more analysis, we are joined by Mr. Meher Nicholas Fazeli, a chairman of the EU Asian Center from Paris, and we're also joined by Ms. Kamila Zaradicha Romanovska, a professor of EU law and security studies from Brussels. Good morning to you both, and welcome to Qnews and to our program In Depth. Let me start here with Mr. Fazeli. What motivated President Trump, from your point of view, to consider changes in U.S. involvement with NATO?
I'm delighted to join you today. To make a long story short, President talks a lot, refreshing a difference from the previous administration where Joe Biden was very isolated and only spoke to the press 2 or 3 times a year in a very scripted way. Scripted, so everything he said was prepared in advance by his advisors, including the replies he gave to journalists in the Oval Office or at White House briefings. With Trump's case, it is the complete opposite. Trump's talks in a very loose way, all day long to tens of journalists. He held improvised press conferences to the great surprise of the members of his cabinet. And so I think the comments he made recently on NATO's Article 5 should be put within that context of a man who sends perhaps too many signals. Now, he's not, unlike what Trump's enemies are saying, he's not doing that in an irrational, chaotic manner. There's a purpose to the madness. So he's sending signals, sometimes brutal in the eyes of the receiving party. And here, the receiving party is clearly Europe. And so European leaders feel humiliated, pressured by Trump, bombarding them with signals. So changing Article 5 or changing the NATO agreement would be very complicated, and Trump knows that. He knows it. So I think by saying these words, he's putting pressure on them. Why? Because, NATO is perceived in Europe as being a collection of 32 members, and the theory of one man, one vote, one member, one opinion. It is not true. It's what the Europeans would like to believe. It is what Macron or Starmer would like to believe, perhaps, but in reality it's not true, because the North Atlantic Alliance is first and foremost Atlantic, and it's first and foremost American. Why is it first and foremost American? Because America spends alone, America's military budget by itself alone is more than 3 times all the other NATO member states' military spendings combined, including Britain and Turkey. So what does it tell you? NATO is about America. It's an American alliance, like it or not. And in a way, it's a toy. It's a Cold War era American toy. Now, if America, like a young child, would like to break its toy, it can do it. I think it will not do it because it's not in America's interest. But I think Trump is playing with the Europeans and is putting pressure on them because he wants them to do some very precise things. And until now, they don't want to follow Trump's lead.
Mm. And that, of course, will be speaking about the things that President Trump wants. But let me go first to Professor Romanovska. How might prioritizing NATO members based on defense spending affect the alliance unity from your point of view?
We have to take into account that prioritizing NATO members states based on defense spending could really cause significant internal friction within the alliance. First of all, while larger economies such as US or France may have the means to meet the higher defense spending expectation, the smaller countries, particularly those very close to Russia, might struggle with this demand. However, the countries in Eastern Europe who have very vivid memories of Soviet occupation are especially vulnerable for external threats, and they will be deeply motivated to maintain NATO collective defense. It's the very, very existence of them in their believing. These nations understand that the security depends very heavily on the NATO's unity, and the focus on defense spending could fuel internal division between wealthier and smaller countries. Economies, sure. But growing realization of defense and deterrence should be prioritized over other issues, such as global charity EU and the wealthy countries are environmental concerns. This is really important for many European countries, especially those who are facing a very direct security threats, will likely recognize the need of balanced foreign investment and global charity with robust defense strategy. NATO must ensure a fair distribution of defense responsibilities, which might require a shift away from global commitments towards a stronger regional defense collaboration. And we can already see it from the perspective of EU and NATO cooperation. We can already see it that EU is itself as an international organization is really pushing forward, creating its own defense spending. It's already created, let's say, quite wide defense support spending programs. And while it's really now focused on external dimension and military dimension of security, we can really observe that the Frontex EU board is growing stronger and stronger, defending external borders of the EU while cooperating very strongly and very, let's say, in a very versatile manner with European neighborhood countries. And Europol is getting more and more investment as well when we go to internal security. And now clearly is the time to invest more in the security and defense. And this is something which cannot be delayed anymore, clearly as that.
Yes, but you did not answer me of how would that reflect on the alliances between both sides, the United States and Europe.
Well, obviously, of course, right away. Obviously, this actually will really might have lead to the very strong internal fraction within the alliance. The existence of the alliance as such maybe it's no longer a case in such a manner that might lead to certain, reorganization of alliance. But from the US point of view, this is a very long-term commitment. This is when they are really, let's say, prioritizing already the countries who are spending more. We can see the Trump's, let's say, approach toward President Andrzej Duda from Poland, who actually is one of those presidents who are really pushing forward to stronger defense. And observe his approach, the Donald Trump approach from first of his term and now to the other. When it comes to the country who are quite reluctant and who want to be, let's say, more neutral, this is not going to happen anymore. And Trump is sending a very clear message: or you're going to spend more, or we are not going to take care of you in case anything happens.
Right,
and
clear.
The trade as such is already a very strong factor to ensure that the member states who are not invested that much in investing in defense and security, meeting this 2% target, will have to do.
Right, let me get here to Vasily, and could you explain the implication of potentially not defending a NATO member that fails to meet defense spending targets? And what does this mean?
I think it's just a psychological trick which Trump is using to force
A kind of pressure, you mean here?
Yeah, exactly. Because the NATO treaty in itself is not a carte menu, so you can't say, oh, but I will interpret Article 5 only if you spend 2.1% of GDP on defense. That is not true. But Trump is right. Put pressure on the Europeans because fear works. So he's instilling uncertainty and fear in the heart. So what I just want to say something very quickly is, we've been speaking about defense spending, right? So what are defense spending? They are essentially industrial and infrastructure investment. You build a factory to manufacture rockets and missiles, etc. These infrastructure and defense and industrial programs.
This weaponry.
Yeah.
You're speaking here about weapons. You're not speaking about the structure of the army or the armed forces of
actually,
the joint armed forces, right?
My point, you're right. My point is a time frame. So if you are, let's say, the Slovak Republic, or if you're Luxembourg, or if you are Holland, and you've been underspending, under pressure from Trump, you'll say, oh my God, if I don't spend enough, Trump will not come to the defense of Luxembourg or Slovakia. Let's spend more. Let's spare our fair share. What are industrial and infrastructure military spendings? They are over 6, 10, 15 years. So if you want to build a factory to manufacture, missiles, it will take you 5, 6 years. The war on Ukraine, like it or not, will be finished within 3, 4 months. So here we see the time frame is different. Europe is going to spend more on its defense. Recently, under psychological pressure from Trump, it is good. But that spending will be 9, 10, 15-year programs.
But from your point of view, let me here ask Mr. Fazeli, how do you think, or how is it possible for Europe to spend or to increase its expenditure on the NATO or on its military aspects in the NATO if they are coming out of fresh or did not come out of Ukrainian-Russian war? How do you think they can be able to do that?
Well, this is why there's a lot of hypocrisy on all sides. So governments on all sides are lying a lot to their own people. And the biggest lie is the time frame. The time frame of the Ukraine war, it will be over in 2, 3 months. So what now Russia and America are negotiating is the terms of the end of the war. The Europeans are saying, oh, no, we don't want to end the war on Russia's terms. Trump is not good. We're going to spend more on defense, but it's a completely different time frame. There's a deeper issue here, which will blow at the face of Europeans, I think, pretty soon.
Let me here take Professor Romanovska and what she thinks of this of the U.S. perception towards.
I think that yes, I think the U.S. is actually quite rightly so pointing the fact that the European Union and European countries, such as those who were already mentioned, were really focused on, let's say, greening and all those climate change issues, while strongly neglecting defense and security. We had to take into account that their focus was rather on being a global charity leader than actually defending themselves. And sooner or later, this could cause a very serious structural issues, as the army needs time and efforts to be rebuilt, as well as people who will be willing to serve in the military will be having enough time and efforts to actually obtain a very necessary skills. That's the reason why European countries already started some sort of very light negotiations and cooperation with the PESCO, Permanent European Security Cooperation, within the EU, but it was still very, very, let's say, taken. European countries were really, let's say, focused on collaboration with the European Union, and they didn't put enough pressure on their own security and defense. Well, clearly very much neglecting their defense and their own army and military approach. We can observe here that whilst we have certain, let's say, development from certain countries, and I have to point at for the Eastern Europe, where those, let's say, memories of Soviet Union are still alive, they have the so-called WTO, which is territorial defense army, which are only people who voluntary, but they are already aware of the fact that this might happen, war might happen. There was strong investment within the certain European countries, but that's very actually tricky. Certain countries, even certain, say, mass media, let's say mainstream media, even if we can use it, they were actually quite strongly criticizing those countries for actually fueling nationalism. The issue is that the nationalism and creation and maintaining very high standards of your own army, of your own defense, is absolutely a different thing. I think this kind of quite strong pressure of the federalization of the European Union, making the unity as a European, as a citizenship as such,
Yes.
led to the situation when country lived in a very happy bubble of we are strong, we are secure, because we have as well United
Professor
States of our
Camilla,
backs.
Professor Camilla, unfortunately our time is out, and I guess this is an issue or a topic that needs more and more episodes to discuss, and definitely we remain to see the developments and how it unfolds. That was Mr. Meher Nicholas Frizeli, chairman of the EU Asian Center, and Camilla Zarich-Romanovska, professor of EU law and security studies. We thank you both for your valuable insights, and I guess that brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more coming up on Q News.